So welcome back to another class. Today we're going to be covering some really good aim tips that you guys can use, some god aim tips that you guys can implement into your game. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty of how to counter strafe. I feel like there's enough videos covering that already, but we're going to be covering some things that I've noticed players, especially around the middle ranks, that struggle to really push forward when they're trying to aim. Okay. Just as a big reminder, thank you guys for 500 subscribers. We've done a really good job on that. Big reminder, we're going to have a C9 jersey raffle at 1,000 subscribers. So if you want to join on that raffle, we need to reach that mark first. And then we just need to get some like, comment, and subscriptions on each one of you so you guys can enter one raffle. For each video, that's one raffle ticket. Okay, so let's get started. The content that we're going to be covering today, it's going to be a two-parter. Number one, I'm going to give you guys the tips. And then number two, I'm going to give you guys what you guys can use for warm-ups, activities, things you guys can do in deathmatch, an Aimlabs playlist, things you guys can use to get a little bit better in whatever you're struggling with. Okay, so let's get started. I feel like we covered slice the pie before, but just for anyone that's still on that mark of not really being too sure what it is, slicing the pie is the act of slowly cutting each individual angle in slices. You're slowly taking apart this angle right here, as you can see from the example, and you're just taking it apart. The whole thing with slicing the pie is that you want to make sure that you're getting just enough information to be able to contest the angle, while at the same time not exposing yourself to like a bunch of different angles, as you can see here. Okay, this should be your main source of information in order for you to properly use slicing the pie. And this is where a lot of people tend to struggle, is that they don't really pre-aim. You're going to notice that this character right here, this person is pre-aiming into the angle before they swing. And then they use their counter strafing to really just finish the fight. Make sure that you're using the slice the pie technique alongside the pre-aim to be able to land on the target when you're taking the fight. This is not including things like using maybe, for example, a sky flash to cover the angle or using a drone to cover it. This is when you have absolutely no idea where the enemy is, you have no utility, or you want to take no noise into consideration, and you want to make sure that you're playing this as slowly as possible. Okay. Again, this should be your main source of information. So make sure you're pre-aiming these corners. I see a lot of players that are struggling in plat, and they're kind of rounding these corners as they're turning around into an area, and then they get surprised when that happens. Okay. They get surprised when they find an opponent, and then they get caught off guard, and then they have to flick down or right or to the left. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on that. If you have a really hard time finding that headshot placement when you're pre-aiming, make sure you're looking for map markers. So I'm going to pause this little thing right here if I can. You can see that right here, this would be considered a map marker. They're all scattered throughout the map. For each individual map, you'll always be able to find these little markers. These markers are really particular with where the head is. So make sure you figure out where they are for each individual place that you're looking for. Some places are easier. So for example, if I wanted to deal with anyone right here, I could use this bar. But if I wanted to deal with anyone right here, then I would have to figure out this line right here, or maybe this little box right there, this little plank of wood perhaps, right? Make sure that you're looking at different things throughout the map, and they're going to give you an edge as to where you should be pre-aiming. In fact, when you are pre-aiming, you can use this as a way to get that advantage, right? You can see how I can prepare and then kind of look around and make sure that I'm head level. Okay, this is how pre-aiming can give you a huge edge in getting those fights done. Number two, that's patience. I feel like this one's a pretty big no-brainer, but there's a lot of people that still struggle on that. Patience is one of the most crucial components of good aim. Okay, you need to be very sure of which fight you're going to be taking when you're doing it. And if you do catch a fight that you weren't ready for, you got to make sure you don't panic. Okay, make sure that when you're looking for those fights, you have a little bit of knowledge before you're taking any fight, or you're taking those angles into consideration. So this is where you can use examples of jump peeking. You can use utility. You can use, like I said, flashes, drones. You can use anything in your utility, into your kits, into anything that your team has in order to be able to take these fights. Make sure that you are not like that one player that we're going to be seeing right here that just immediately doesn't expect us and just starts spraying. Okay, this is how you are going to always get caught. Okay, this is the best way for you to sort of start practicing a little bit of more of that calmer aim, a little bit more of those expected fights, so you can get an easier shot on the opponent. Again, the more knowledge you have onto an angle, the easier it is for you to stay prepared. Last but not least, Speed and distance. This is one of the bigger ones that a lot of players tend to struggle with. They need to understand that speed isn't consistent. It is not a constant. Okay. When you're looking at speed, it is important for you guys to know that there's a little bit of a ramp up. It's a very slight ramp up when it comes to speed. Whenever a player is ready to swing an angle, they need to start slow and then immediately they reach peak speed. So most of the time when people take those swings, they start a little bit farther back and then they're swinging all the way through. Once they're at that peak position, depending on how far they are from you, that peak distance really matters. So let's see, for example, this is when they're farther away. You can see that when they're farther away, they're going to be moving much slower. In fact, they're a lot easier to counter. When you're using that to your advantage, you can do things like aim closer into the wall. You're able to use this to your advantage because the closer they are, the easier it is for you to catch them. They're going to move much slower on your screen. It is a lot easier for you to react. Now, this isn't for everybody, but of course, the faster they're going to be moving, the easier it is for you to kind of predict where you're going to put your crosshair. However, the closer they are to you, as in this example right here, you're going to see how fast they move across your screen. Most of the time when you're taking these fights, it is really hard to predict where exactly the opponent is going to land. They could land here, they could land there. You don't really know. So when you're taking these angles and you're taking these fights at really close ranges, it is expected of you to really hold these angles a little bit farther away from the angle they're trying to be. So for example, farther away, I can hold closer, and then closer over here, I can hold maybe an angle that's right here in the middle. So when the person does swing, I can just land my crosshair on them. Okay, this is a really good way to catch opponents off guard when they're swinging, again, at that full speed, and you can catch them off guard because they're playing at that distance that you're already expecting them to be. Okay, so just to really recap on that, the farther they are, the slower they are, you have more leeway, hold closer to the angle. Okay, this could be a good place for you to kind of start. Depending on the angle, you might see some differences. Maybe they like to hug the wall, maybe they like to be farther away and they like to ego swing. Depending on that, it could be an opponent difference, it could be a rank difference. Take into consideration what those differences are, and then you can get used to and adapt in the game. When they are closer, they will move faster. Hold farther away from the wall. This is going to give you a huge edge when you're taking those fights. Now that we kind of understand some of those tips, let's talk about ways to practice them. The best way that I think people should be practicing is to develop better motor skills. Not everybody has the same time, not everybody has the same amount of effort that they put into the game, and that's understandably so because there's so many things that you could be doing with your time. But if you want to get better at the game, you should be investing some time into warm-ups and aim training. For me, I think aim training is really useful, and I really think that you should be looking at playlists like the one I've shown right here. Improve Demon 1 routine, I'm going to be putting it down in the description, and I'm going to be putting it here as well in the general chat. I'm going to be giving you guys this share link if you guys are kind of curious about it. I think it's a really robust playlist, and I think it covers a lot of the main things that you should know about Valorant. There's a lot of horizontal tasks, and there's a lot of big flicks that you have to cover. And it really, really kind of puts a concise little package of where you should be focusing your time, instead of everything else where they're making you track and they're making you do all these crazy flicks that you're not really going to be using in the game all that much. Okay. One thing to consider is you're going to be playing and you're not going to feel too familiar with it. You might feel some discomfort. Mild discomfort is normal. It means that you're using things that you haven't been using before muscle-wise. That is okay. If it feels like it's painful, if it feels impossible, it might be a problem with the way you're holding your mouse. It could be the problem with the way that you're sitting, with the way that you're using your arm. Anything of those things, your sensitivity, your mouse might be too heavy. Things to consider. They're usually the last resort of things, but if you're in pain, there's a problem, okay? So one thing to really just look at is pay attention to these playlists. There's plenty of them around. There's a benchmarks playlist that you can use. There's other things as well. I'm pretty sure that Voltaic does things as well that you could be looking into, but this is the one that I recommend. I think it's a really good playlist, okay? Now let's talk about things you can do in-game. There's two little methods that I want to show people. The first one is zone defense. So we talked about the 3 different tips that you can use. The first one is going to be understanding that angle clearing and angle holding. This is what I like to call zone defense. You pick an area, regardless of where you are on the map. You're going to pick an area, you're going to be holding it down. Bonus points if you pick an area that you are really bad at in the game. So for example, let's say you're really bad at holding this heaven area, this little area by mail, then you can use this to your advantage because what you're doing is you're just practicing getting into this position and then just holding it down. The way that you should be focusing is keeping that map control and making sure that you're emphasizing on your movement, because you can't stay in one spot. You have to move around. You have to look for different opponents. Do not hunt for kills. If you see somebody that is right here and they run away, don't just chase them down. Keep your position, okay? Practice that patience. They might re-swing again, like I just did right here. Made that mistake. I thought they were going to swing earlier. They didn't. And this is why when you die, you can then reset and learn from that death. What did I do wrong here? Well, one thing that I can look at is I got impatient. Saw this person. I thought they were going to swing. They didn't hold close. They didn't move close. They just did a wide swing. And they got me. I can use this as a way to kind of identify where I could have moved. I could have moved a little bit farther behind, or I could have held a better angle. This way you can kind of create a little bit of a history in your brain as to where you should be holding when taking these fights. Okay? That's what zone defense is about. The next one is the Miyagi method. I think that I used to cover this method before I saw it on YouTube, so there's a lot of different iterations of how people do it. Some people tell you to just look at the person and try to just make sure that you have that shot. Other people tell you that you should instead be trying to move around while you're holding your crosshair in their head. I've seen different variations. The variation that I like to teach is that in order for you to prevent yourself from being that panic shooter, okay, in order for you to prepare and keep that counter strafing down, I need you to have some sort of limit with the amount of shots you have on an opponent. If you're going to prepare and be okay with being shot at, because again, it will happen, you got to be okay with just having 3 shots per person, and that's it. Try to pick single fire weapons. You can use the Guardian, the Sheriff, and if you want to use a rifle, be my guest. But the way that you should be using this is as a way of essentially trying to get yourself in a position where I feel like I can track this person. I feel like if I took the shot, I would have been fine. But you're trying to keep yourself from overshooting, from doing more than 3 shots per person, because then you're going to start struggling to keep control under these situations right here. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're practicing that mouse control. Make sure you're learning to track, because a lot of the time you have to track between the 2 people swinging, between the 2 different positions that they might be strafing from. You got to make sure that you're ready to do so. Once you feel more comfortable with this and you don't feel like you're panicking, then you can go for more style points. You can go for flicks. You can go for different things. I know some people like to kind of just shoot them in the body, see what happens when they get tagged, and then just kind of shoot them again, right? So there's different ways of kind of adding variation, but the Miyagi method is perfect for those that struggle with, again, with that panic and that counter strafing. Okay, and this one, the way that I tell people to do it is, regardless of where you start, try to pick a goal line to kind of end at, and then you just move directly to that goal line. That's the way that I tell people to practice the Miyagi method, because otherwise they just kind of stay in a position and they hear for audio cues and they're not really practicing catching new fights. Instead, they're just preparing for a fight they already knew was going to happen, and that's not going to translate in game. So make sure you're using the Miyagi method like so if you want to practice that panic shots, or the counter strafing. Okay. So with that out of the way, that basically concludes the video. Thank you guys for watching. And I will be holding a question period right after this. All right, let's close this up.